Transforming thousands of acres of raw Texas land into a master-planned community requires moving mountains of earth and laying down millions of dollars in capital before even a single foundation is poured. Underground water lines, complex sewer systems, deep drainage channels, and paved roads have to be installed entirely up front. Existing municipalities refuse to absorb these speculative horizontal construction costs. They simply will not place the financial weight of an unbuilt subdivision onto tax goals of their current residents. To solve this, Texas relies on specialized political subdivisions. These localized districts isolate the financial risk of new development and shift the infrastructure costs directly to the future users of that infrastructure. The state leans heavily on two primary financial structures to get this done: municipal utility districts, known as MUDs, and tax increment reinvestment zones, known as TIRZs. We are going to deeply dissect the statutory mechanics, revenue models, and municipal trade-offs of these two competing systems. Understanding these completely invisible financial boundaries explains exactly how massive suburban expansions are funded without instantly bankrupting their host cities. A municipal utility district is an independent political subdivision authorized by the state to levy its own localized property taxes and issue tax-exempt bonds. A developer cannot simply create one on a whim. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality must rigorously review and approve the creation of every MUD. During the initial phase, the private developer must front 100% of the cash required to put the water, sewer, and road infrastructure into the ground. The MUD cannot immediately issue debt to pay the developer back. The state imposes a strict performance-based limitation. This conceptual scale illustrates the state's 10-to-1 ratio rule. A MUD cannot issue bonds until there is 10 times the amount of taxable value sitting on the ground. A $10 million bond requires $100 million of appraised real estate. This conservative structure was codified as a deliberate reform. Following the speculative lending and savings and loan crisis of the 1980s, Texas regulators required physical proof of value to prevent districts from issuing empty municipal debt. Once that 10-to-1 ratio is achieved, the MUD issues its tax-exempt bonds, reimburses the developer for the upfront capital, and levies a distinct property tax on the new residents to service that specific debt. As the subdivision builds out and total property values climb, the MUD's tax rate is actively managed downward until the debt is entirely retired. Governance shifts alongside this growth. Control of the MUD transitions from an initial board appointed by the developer to a permanent board elected directly by the residents living inside the district. The ultimate endpoint for a mature MUD is full-purpose annexation by a neighboring municipality. The city of Sugar Land, for example, expanded its footprint and population heavily through the organized annexation of paid-off MUDs. The MUD architecture isolates infrastructure risk entirely to the private developer, but it requires levying a new, dedicated property tax on incoming homeowners to function. A tax increment reinvestment zone, or TIRZs, operates differently. It is an accounting mechanism that captures existing revenue streams rather than levying any new taxes. This chart shows the internal mechanics of a TIRZ. When the zone is created, a static baseline of property value is established. The host city continues to collect and keep all tax revenue generated by that baseline value. But as new development drives up property values, 100% of the new tax revenue generated above that baseline is captured and redirected into a separate, isolated TIRZ fund. A specialized TIRZ board controls this captured money, restricting its use strictly to infrastructure improvements and development incentives located within that exact geographic boundary. Developers negotiate 380 agreements with these boards. These legal contracts dictate how the captured funds are dispersed back to the developer over set periods, typically 5 to 10 years. Developers aggressively pursue TIRZs for commercial and mixed-use projects. The structure allows them to capture the upside of both property and sales taxes generated by community commercial activity. While a TIRZ avoids double taxing residents, it effectively starves the broader municipal budget of the new revenue generated by its own localized economic growth. The city of Manville, Texas, provides a clear dataset to observe the structural tension a TIRZ places on local governments. This proportional area chart shows Manville's recent budget cycle, where the city experienced a massive $300 million increase in total new appraised property value. However, $200 million of that new value was locked inside a TIRZ boundary, entirely walled off from the city's general operating fund. The city remains legally obligated to provide core services. They must supply police patrols, fire response, and infrastructure maintenance to these newly developed properties. Mandel's calculated cost to deliver those municipal services sits at exactly $645 per new home. This dual access comparison illustrates the resulting shortfall. The city incurs the heavy $645 per home service cost, but receives only $345,000 in total baseline revenue from those properties. We can see the opportunity cost here. Without the TIRZ in place, the city would have collected an additional $1.1 million in property tax revenue from that exact same growth. City administrators face an immediate operating deficit. The cost to service the new development rises sharply, but the new tax revenue needed to pay for those services is withheld by the TIRZ. The developer faces a different reality. Without the TIRZ capturing that value to offset costs, the horizontal infrastructure required to enable the $300 million in growth would never have been financially viable. Cities accept these localized fiscal gaps as the price of rapid expansion. The temporary budget strain guarantees the long-term feasibility of large-scale commercial development. This 2x2 matrix categorizes the core mechanical differences between the two systems. In the residential quadrant, MUDs function as standalone political subdivisions. They levy localized property taxes and rely on strict performance-based bond ratios to fund infrastructure in unincorporated areas. In the commercial quadrant, TIRZs function as localized accounting mechanisms. They capture incremental growth to reinvest in specific zones, bypassing the need for a new tax entirely. Choosing between these financial tools is a highly consequential public policy decision for local governments. The selection dictates long-term jurisdictional control, determines municipal tax equity, and sets the strict timeline for when infrastructure is eventually annexed. Regulators and developers must align these tools to manage the intense velocity and scale of land development required along major Texas corridors. The visible skyline and sprawling footprint of Texas depend entirely on this invisible financial architecture, ensuring that massive, rapid growth pays for itself.